We are live. What's up, everybody? I probably should have taken a few more moments to prepare, but I figured we were already getting to an extremely late start, so I decided that I was just going to start the stream. So, yeah, share this stream around and about, get people here, get bodies in the house. I advertised this stream on a couple Zeitgeist forums and some social media posts, but yeah, no, the more the merrier. The people that I'm trying to reach out to with the message I've got thus far are specifically people who are advocates of a resource based economy, so to speak. And so I've got some insights. I have some insights. I have some interesting things that I would like to bring to their attention. But what to bring up first? What to bring up first? I guess we could just go ahead and get started. Oh, yeah, that's right. Marxist Reading Circle. We have those at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays and Sundays. Feel free to tag along if you want a quality lesson in Marxist literature. I apologize, guys. I'm getting off to a very late start. My girl kept me up very late last night, very late. And then I was trying to leave her place this morning, but she wouldn't have any of it. So I got stuck here. All right. So we only got two people, and everyone just fucking left. I mean, I guess I could just hang out and wait for people to come back. But yeah, hello, guys. Hello. Welcome, comrades. I look high. I'm not high, dude. I'm just tired. I just woke up like not even an hour ago. Maybe it's because of the hat here. I'll take the hat off. No, it doesn't help. I'll look worse. But yeah, no. I'm not presently under the influence of any drugs. I'm just going to go ahead and share the stream. Or better yet, I am going to just ping everybody and just say we're live. Here we go. Announcements. Everyone, we're live. Get in here. Yeah, but I got a new microphone too. Check this shit out. High quality studio mic, built-in pop filter. People have been recommending me this microphone for a while. They've been telling me to get this Shure SR58 mic, and I finally got it. What I didn't get, however, was a proper cord, a proper connector. I have the XLR cord over there, but it is not a female cord like what I need to connect this. It is a male cord. So unfortunately, until the new male cord that I ordered online can come in, and until I can get that resent back into Amazon, I'm not going to be able to use that mic for at least a couple more days. But yeah, no. That works. Looks professional. Thank you. Did I know that Jacques Fresco was in correspondence with Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic professional candidate of 1968? Fresco was very hard-headed, would not work with anyone. One of his problems. Will you watch Haas's comedic stand-up in CPI? Yeah. I will make a follow-up stream. I will be more than happy to make a follow-up stream and to react to that. But you have to send it to me. Not having the right cord for your new mic. I know, right? Like, they sent me this shit. And the mic wasn't even included. So I went to go order the mic separately. And my dumbass didn't check to make sure it was the proper kind of connector. I needed a female connector, but I ordered a male lead right here. So as you can see, male on male, the Christians were right. It doesn't work. This don't work. Can't do it. I can't do it. So yeah, I got to wait for the female connector I ordered to come in. And then sound quality is should be glorious from here on out. All right, cool. 8 people. Another reason why I was late to the punch is because I needed to get coffee in. Like, I didn't have my coffee yet. I'm not a functional human being when I do not have my espresso. It's part of the curse of being from Italy or being Italian. Well, half Italian. Mother's from southern Italy where they drink a lot of espresso. And regular coffee won't do it. Energy drinks won't do it. It has to be espresso. If If I don't have espresso in the morning, I am not a functioning human being. Wasn't that female you just showed? No, those were two males. Male is when you have the parts, the bits sticking out. Female is when you have the little plug-in where the parts go in. Those were two males, bro. Fresco said that it was the Great Depression of the 1930s and the U.S. wartime mobilizations that most influenced his views. Essentially, economic planning works. Yeah, I mean, Cockshot talks about it too. How I think there were, like, if you look at the war industry and the military-industrial complex, I mean, central planning is used all the time, people. Like, it's used all the time. It's used within the context internally, like every corporation, state infrastructure planning is used all the time. The main argument that liberals just make is like, but there's no way that you could centrally plan a whole economy. You could plan all these little things right here, but you couldn't plan the whole. It's sort of like saying, yeah, no, a car could totally go and travel a mile in about a minute. But there's no fucking way that car could travel at 60 miles in an hour. See what I'm saying, homie? That's sort of like how the argument goes. I've heard a lot of arguments by libs. These people are professionals. When it comes to like thinking of reasons why socialism doesn't work, you will be surprised. Like, I practice jujitsu on the regular. I practice martial arts on the regular. These people are black belts at fucking mental jujitsu when it comes to fucking not addressing the elephant in the room. Like, fucking seriously. Fresco recites the story that the U.S. government literally paid to expand private production capability, and then after the war, it just gave them for free. Huh. It's free real estate. Good to know that it's exclusively about the pins and not the plug itself. Yeah, exactly. So, this isn't a part of my inherited family curse, but this is my other bad habit. Kratom. I take this at least every day. I take it on the regular. I take it on the day. If I don't take it, I mean, I've really experienced withdrawals from not taking it, but I just prefer to not go without it. So, yeah, Fresco recites the story that the U.S. government literally paid to expand private production capability, and then after the war, it was just given to them for free. That doesn't surprise me. Fresco is a revolutionary. He is a great thinker. Tell you what, we'll wait about 2-3 minutes, and then when this live stream is over, I'm just going to include a timestamp to when we officially get started on the presentation. But in the time being, I'm just waiting people I suck at words. I'm waiting for people to come in this stream right now. So if you guys would do me a favor, share the stream. Share it all over your social media. Seriously, help me get the spirit bomb going. I'm going to go ahead and share it myself. I'm going to go ahead and get it going myself. Hey, look, there's me. I'm going to go to Twitter. Let's go to my other bad habit. Here we go. And share this on Twitter, and you guys can retweet this. We are live. Share everywhere. I had prepared about 12 slides in preparation for this stream, all in Microsoft's Paint. And I'm proud of my work. Pretty solid with graphics when it comes to that. How incompetent presidents got into presidency, people are that really dumb. The whole point of the president isn't even like... The president, I mean, it's to give the people the feeling of choice. I mean, really, America was designed specifically not to work with respect to its democratic process. Like, there are so many fail-safes and mechanisms in place that it's just a sham. Like me and my comrades were reading about it last night in the Discord, but Marx and Engels were talking about this. Yeah, liberal democracy is a sham. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's not really democratic at all. Have you ever read any of Thorsten Veblen? No, I haven't. I've heard of him. So, okay. Resource-based economy. All right, time to touch some nerves. I don't know how many Zeitgeisters are here. Probably none. But let's go ahead and touch a nerve. Resource-based economy is literally fucking communism. It's an economy based on resources that is moneyless, that is without state, without class, where the means of production are directly managed by the people in a direct democratic manner, a collaborative manner. It is a world where human well being and quality of life are directly factored into account with respect to economic planning, as well as maintaining a balanced load with our earthly habitat. Uh, the This is basically the end goal of Marx and Engels, and this is what the Venus Project and sustainability people are talking about in their final goal. But it's literally like communism and a resource based economy are one and the same. One and the same. But this is basically what it is. So I guess I'll just go ahead and get started with the stream. It doesn't look like many people are here. Man, fuck it. All right, so we'll call the timestamp 12 minutes. The timestamp will be officially 12 minutes. So for now, let me go ahead and get my notes open and we will get started. Stream prep notes. Stream prep notes. Let's go ahead and open a separate tab in Google Chrome. Google Chrome. So, something I want to share. Let's go ahead and get started. Mute, stop cam, settings. Am I seriously? I'm sorry. Why are you not working? Where is the share screen? There you are. There you are. Let's go ahead and go to this Chrome tab, this new tab I got. Let's do it, friendos. Let's do it. So, let me get my link open. Let's talk about these. Here we go. So, what is the Zeitgeist movement? The Zeitgeist movement was founded in 2008. It is a subsidiary and public health advocacy organization. It conducts research and activism through a network of regional chapters, public events, and various forms of educational media. The focus includes organizing that the majority of the modern world's social problems, including mounting ecological crises and destabilizing economic inequality, is not an inevitable outcome of our civilization. Rather, TZM sees these issues as consequential symptoms of our outdated social system, capitalism. While common reforms and general community support to improve conditions are interests to TCM, working to galvanize the population into a move to change the very nature of our social system itself is the goal. In this, a central criticism has been addressing the inefficient nature of market-based economics, or capitalism itself. TZM includes that without a dramatic move away from the incentives and structural dynamics of the market system, there's little hope today for further relevant improvements. In the area of human rights, ecological sustainability, and general public health, supporters refer to the model promoted by TZM as communism. I mean post-scarcity economy. Star Trek Society, excuse me. Can't use that word. That's a no-no word. We got to dissociate ourselves from communism because Mustache Man, Venezuela, iPhone, 100 million. But anyways, this model is inferential, derived from modern principles of scientific, sustainable earthly management, along with contemporary findings in social and epidemiological research. TZM interests in change is global. It has no allegiance to country or traditional political platforms. It views the world as a single system and the species as a single family. It recognizes that all countries must disarm and learn to share resources, ideas, if we are to expect to survive in the long run. That's what we are all going to do, guys. You're my family. You guys are fam. All we got to do is hold hands, sing Kumbaya, my lord, have a little cocoa and blankets. But yeah, no, that's the summary of Zeitgeist. Now let's go to the Venus Project. And then I'm going to briefly go into the history of these groups, and I'm going to talk about basically their breakup. They were married together and then they broke up. And then I'm going to talk about the reasons why they broke up, some of the roots and origins behind their founding. But for now, let's just go through the Venus Project. The Venus Project is an organization that proposes a feasible plan for action for social change, one that works towards a peaceful and sustainable global civilization. It outlines an alternative to strive towards, where human rights are no longer paper proclamations, but a way of life. In other words, a shedding of the liberal ideals, or basically the acknowledgement that liberalism has failed. We propose a fresh, holistic approach, one that is dedicated to human and environmental concerns. It is an attainable vision of a bright and better future, one that is appropriate for the times which we live, both practical and feasible for a positive future for all of the world's people. And you know what's kind of funny is a moneyless society has really been possible. Like, if you think about it, it's really been possible since like the 1970s or 1980s, because like when it comes to economics of scale, it requires very vast and abstract, sophisticated methods of computation in order to keep up with all the inputs and outputs. So like if you go back to the year 1919 or 1920, liberals would have had a point that communism was impossible with present day technology. I mean, archaic planning, and obviously it was possible. Like a planned economy absolutely was possible, and the Soviets did it. They did it in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. They did it, and they continued to advance and make their planning process more sophisticated. Like they did start to include cybernetics through the OGOS and ASPR systems within the GOS plan. But within the early stages, a lot of it was just computation done on paper. And they didn't even use barcodes. Like they didn't have any digital technology. Like, so people talk about the shortages and issues they had that they were running into with their planning. You know, if you don't even have barcodes to track your shit or any of your inventory, like no wonder you're going to have shortages. Like you're not going to be able to know where things are going. But anyways, the Venus Project is a veritable blueprint for the genesis of a new civilization, one that is based on human concern and environmental reclamation. One fundamental premise is that we work towards having all of Earth's resources as the common heritage of all the world's people. Anything less will simply result in a continuation of the same catalog of problems and inherent in the present system. Experience tells us that human behavior can be directed either towards constructive or destructive activity. That is what the Venus Project is all about, directing our technology and resources towards the positive for the maximum benefit of the people and the planet, and seeking out new ways of thinking and living that emphasize and celebrate the vast potential of the human spirit. We have the tools at hand to design and build a future that is worthy of human potential. All right, so that's the Venus Project. I think they got a little introductory video. Let's do it.
The Venus Project. The Venus Project offers a new socio-economic system that isn't capitalism, communism, socialism, nor fascism. It's nothing like anything that has ever been tried before. It's not a dictatorship, nor is it democratic. Yet it will achieve what all democracies have always tried to and never did: freedom from violence, abuse, coercion, and restrictions that are unnecessary and only serve a small minority at the expense of the rest. It is a system that works for all of us and the environment we depend on. It seems that society today is unable to provide many people with a high standard of living, although it has been technically possible to do so for quite a while. There are many technical solutions that have been around for many years for housing, transportation, creating clean, renewable energy, growing nutritious food, and providing clean water. But very little has been done to put them into practice due to the insufficiencies of the social structure we live in today. The Venus Project offers a system that would invite those technologies in, shorten the workday, and raise the standard of living higher than what most people realize possible.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the Venus Project. So let me go ahead and open up my slides. Let me go ahead and get my slides open, and we'll go ahead and get started with the official presentation. I just wanted to go through those two to give you guys a backdrop to get you red-pilled on the Zeitgeist movement and Venus Project. So let me go ahead and open my slides. Open my slides. Here we go. Excuse me. Off to a great start, aren't we, comrades? Okay, here we go. So why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why is it that even though I 100% agree with the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movements, why is it that I'm doing these criticisms today? And why is it that I'm going after them? Because nobody is safe from my wrath. That's the first answer. But the real answer is because the purpose of this presentation is to create an olive branch to the RBE sustainability community and organizations overall to and from the Marxist community, as the two of us share a pretty common goal. We both want to achieve a stateless, classless, moneyless, post-scarcity society where the means of production are held in common. What you call a resource-based economy, what we call communism, are basically one and the same. And though we share a common goal, there are some concerning trends that I have noticed within the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist crowd, which have left both the movements practically irrelevant, uninfluential, and dead in the water. And until TZM and TVB and the RBV sustainability advocates in general are able to confront, address, and reconcile these criticisms and concerns, which I will be levying today, I am fully convinced that they will only continue to remain as such. All of these criticisms and concerns I am presenting from a position of good faith. I'm not being a sophist here. These are just genuine concerns and genuine questions that I'm raising that the Zeitgeist movement and Venus Project haven't really accounted for or factored for, and the answers that they do have are incredibly vague, idealistic, and or naive. And I think these are things that should definitely be addressed and brought to the forefront. So with that being said, let us go ahead and get started. Let us get started, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. How do I go? Come on. Come on. More technical difficulties. Fuck it. I'll just share the whole screen. All right. Zeitgeist movement was originally founded in 2008 by filmmaker Peter Joseph. Originally founded by Peter Joseph in 2008, Venus Project was founded in 1995 by Jacques Fresco, though for decades prior to that, Fresco was active talking about his concepts of a resource-based economy. As one of my subscribers noted earlier, R. Buckminster Fuller was another futurist and thinker who was a heavy influence on Fresco. Fresco was very active in his early years. Supposedly, he infiltrated a Ku Klux Klan group and basically deprogrammed their hatred and bigotry from the inside just by asking completely logical questions. So the man, he has my respect for that reason. I respect Fresco as a thinker. I think he's got a lot of excellent ideas. I like his circular city designs. They are really freaking cool. But yeah, as we went through earlier, there's sustainability advocacy groups which seek to raise public awareness and educate people about an alternative to capitalism, which they call a resource-based economy. An RBE is a kind of stateless, classless, moneyless society where the economy is operating according to a plan in a democratic fashion with the deliberate intent to maximize human happiness and well-being while maintaining a balanced load with our earthly habitat. So yeah, that's a thing. The Zeitgeist movies, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them, but the Zeitgeist movies were a huge influence on me personally in very early on in my life. They had a huge impact on my initial political consciousness. I'm not going to lie, I've always been kind of like some kind of socialist at heart. I've always agreed with it deep down. And I've just never it's just always made sense to me that everything is just shared and held in common. It just made the most sense to me instinctively. Even as a kid, it made the most sense. But I didn't quite know what it was because my thought process hadn't been developed yet. So TZM put me kind of on that path. It took me well over a decade to get to where I am now. It took me a while to get to the consciousness that I am now, just saying. But Peter Joseph's movies were a huge influence on me, and they were a huge influence on a lot of people to get involved in the activist chains and circles. A lot of intelligent, well-meaning people. And so, yeah, hence the Zeitgeist movement, Zeitgeist movies. I highly recommend them. Zeitgeist, more specifically, Zeitgeist Addendum and Moving Forward. Those two are better overall because they actually have like an end goal and a promise and a plan of action. Zeitgeist 1 was more more an art piece, more like an art piece by Peter Joseph than it was in like an activist type movie. But yeah, specifically Addendum and Moving Forward, I highly recommend them. So originally, the Zeitgeist movement was to be the activist wing of the Venus Project's originally to be the activist wing of the Venus Project, but what ended up happening was the Venus Project, they broke up in 2014, 2013. I don't remember the exact date, but I was keeping up with it at the time. I was pretty into it around this time. The two orgs split for ideological reasons. As one of my subscribers noted earlier, it probably has a large part to do with Fresco's ego, just being unaccommodating and him being very difficult to work with as a person. I'm willing to bet that that probably had a substantial hand to play, is very substantial hand to play, and well, the reason why they ultimately broke up, now didn't they? So, don't mind me. I'm just opening some extra slides because I'm about to do a little switcheroo. Where were we? Ah, yes. So, sorry we have to do it this way. I was hoping that we could be more honest about it. Here we go. But as I was saying, so you guys want to know who else advocated for a stateless, classless, moneyless society? Let's talk about Marxism. Advocates of a resource-based economy claim that everybody's got it all wrong, that even we have it wrong, comrades. That the liberals have it wrong, that the fascists have it wrong, that the socialists have it wrong, that the communists have it wrong, that the Cincinnati Hunting Lodge has it wrong, that the Jesuits have it wrong, that the Christians have it wrong, that the Muslims have it wrong. Everybody's got it all wrong, but they got it all figured out, right? They're the only ones who have sustainability and environmental design in mind. Because none of us apparently, not even us Marxists, are applying the scientific method to the way the economy should and would operate in a world that made sense. So frequently, I have heard speakers from Peter Joseph to Jacques Fresco and many others within their ilk saying something along the lines of, none of these ideologies have anything to do with sustainability or planning or the quality of human life. Communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism, etc., etc. They have all got it wrong, bro. They're not based on the scientific method. But that is not true. That is exactly what Marxism is all about. It is about demystifying, it's about demystifying economic and politics and social trends. It's all about taking the scientific method and applying it to history and political economy, forming systematic criticisms of the current order, and formulating a path towards a rationally planned economy without money, state, or class. Marx and Engels wrote a great deal about these questions, and their vision of a communist society is extremely similar to your vision of an RBE. And it operates according to a rational plan. It's a stateless, classless, moneyless society where the means of production are held in common. However, Marx and Engels didn't write too extensively on what exactly it would look like because they were more focused on the politics and the happenings of the now than they were hyper-focused on the future and the result. And that's part of the reason why they didn't write too much about it. And whether you like to admit it or not, it is literally the exact same thing as an RBE. You don't want to call it communism, fine. You want to call it a resource-based economy. You want to call it Brueggemann Schmidt. You want to call it a post-scarcity, circular donut city, sky city utopia. Call it whatever you want. We don't have to call it communism. I know that's kind of a dirty word, but as long as we both know what we're talking about here. So, traditionally in Marxist theory, it can be summarized as follows. Throughout history, the primary driving force of all social progress has been class struggle. Struggle between the oppressed and oppressors, from ancient societies, feudal societies, and caste societies, and so on. It is manifested in the form of slave and master, serf and baron, knave and noble, and journeyman and guild master. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we saw the emergence of a new economic mode, which has overthrown all others: capitalism. Under capitalism, the dynamic between workers and owners, the workers sell their labor for a wage, and the capitalist profits from the surplus value extracted from the sales generated by their business. And while capitalism has brought about industrialization in the age of economic growth, it is also an unstable, undemocratic, unsustainable, and contradictory system which lays the groundwork and sows the seeds for its own destruction. At the same time, it also establishes the industrial and scientific basis needed for a new society without money, state, or class. Eventually, as the wealth divide widens, as the crises get worse and worse, as class antagonisms sharpen, workers will eventually have it. The workers will eventually develop class consciousness or develop their class interests. And eventually, it will be within their interests not only to overthrow capitalism, it's really the only rational direction that they're going to be able to go. So, workers will come together, organize, led by the communists, the most theoretically advanced, most politically advanced, most committed members of the movement, and cultivate into a working class movement by which the workers directly overthrow the owners and establish the early stages of the communist society, or what we call socialism. So what'll happen is, under early stage communism or socialism, there's still state, there's probably still going to be money, and class psychology still exists, because all those billionaires you just deposed aren't just going to go away. They and their little reactionary spawn, their little fucking children, are going to be here to stay. And they're probably going to be fleeing the country, turning into little Ayn Rands, turning into little Solzhenitsyns and a little Robert Conquests, writing about the big, bad, evil commies that took away their father's fucking gigantic, colossal slave plantation and billions of dollars in wealth. They took away the family business. They ruined everything. And they're probably going to go to flee to other countries so they can write about their right-wing ideology. But I digress. My point is that there's still a state, because you got to protect the revolution from the remaining capitalist powers and imperialism, not only in theory, but as history has shown. But eventually, as communism spreads, as more and more countries go socialist over time, eventually, several generations deep into socialism, under global socialism, class ego and right-wing ego will begin to die out. And as right-wing ego dies out, and as the threat of counter-revolution gets lessened and lessened, as technology advances and the production process and the administration process becomes increasingly automated, we eventually reach a point to where the state withers away. The state becomes surplus. It's supposed to become superfluous under socialism in theory, and then wither away. That's what's supposed to happen in theory. But as history has shown, that's not quite what happened. We'll get to that in a moment, but for now, let's move on. Fresco died like 7 years ago, bro. Excuse me. Is that all I had? That was 2, right? All right. Yeah, I think this is it. All right, so let's talk about my criticisms now. Title, criticism number 1, rejection of the communist and Marxist labels for the sake of optics. For the sake of optics and for the sake of hippy-dippy, I'm so enlightened. There's one thing that I think Alex Jones had a point on with his debate with Peter Joseph. It's when he was just kind of mocking Peter, and he's like, I'm up here. Dude, Alex Jones is a fucking nutball. Totally unhinged lunatic, but I think he had a point there. I don't think the Zeitgeist people have it all figured out. I think there's actually a lot of questions, but moving on. I don't even have it figured out. I'm not saying I do. I definitely don't have it all figured out. Shit. But I got a better idea than you guys do. Let's go through it. Let's talk about the reasons why they do it, why they choose to dissociate so hardcore from Marxism and communism in general. So The reason for this on the surface seem reasonable. There's a great deal of stigma that's associated with Marxism and the communist movement. And for the sake of broad public appeal, one may be tempted to reject these labels and this shared common history as a means to distance oneself from that legacy. A legacy which, thanks to a lot of lies and propaganda, lives in infamy. On the other hand, resource-based economy advocates will proclaim that their ideas need no label, that political labels and ideology are inherently anti-scientific and superfluous, and that one should reject all labels and brands and instead just advocate for efficiency and sustainability for its own sake. There's a number of problems with this. Let's go through them. So, problem number one, labels and names are not inherently anti-scientific. On the contrary, scientists are constantly naming and labeling things all the time, from various theories to hypotheses and observations and so on. And within science, theories are created to explain facts, and processes are refined to use these explanations of the facts to solve problems and create science and technology. For something to be scientific, it must be one, be able to provide accurate explanative power and have a body of facts supporting this explanative power. Number two, repeatability, or the ability for other people to come along and subject these, basically make the same experiments but with different modifications, basically stress testing the theory by submitting it to peer review, see its repeatability. And then the third thing is predictability. For a model or a theory to be truly scientific, you must be able to make relatively accurate extrapolations or predictions about the future with respect to the observable trends. And so for one to debunk a theory, they have to, one, explain why this theory was wrong, and two, they have to provide an alternative, a better alternative, with an even greater ironclad body of facts to support it. An example of this would be when Newtonian physics usurped Einstein's theory of general relativity. Right now we got relativity, but in the future we could make even greater discoveries about physics, deep understanding of universal physics, and then turns out, oh, Einstein was wrong. Now we got someone else's theory and model of physics. So a new model, new theory comes along, usurps the old. Same goes for Lamarckism. Anybody heard of Lamarckism? Lamarck was a botanist. He was one of the earliest evolutionary scientists, and his theories and his works were usurped by Darwin. Not Darwinism, but Darwin's theory of evolution. And since then, these theories have only continued to be vindicated through the scientific literature. The new theory doesn't completely replace the old one. There's still a lot of Newtonian physics that are relevant within Einstein's theory of general relativity. What comes along is the new theory just factors in for what was correct, and it just updates itself. It's like you get a clearer and clearer picture with each iteration. So you get closer and closer to this constant that is the truth. So let me go ahead and yeah, Jacques Fresco lived to be like 101, I think. So let's go to the next document. Criticism. Oh, wow, cute. That's cute. Hold on a second. Here we go. I found it. We'll go ahead and open you. This has got to be the most unprofessional slideshow I've ever done. But anyways, we are right here. Anyways, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about why rejection of Marxist labels is a bad idea. But anyways, Marxism matches all the three criteria noted prior, and many of its core concepts still hold up and remain relevant today, well under scrutiny, despite ideological attempts by mainstream political econ to refute it and dispute it. The labor theory of value still holds up. Dialectical materialism still holds up. Marx's prediction that socialist revolutions came true. And to this day, it is primarily Marxism which is heavily stigmatized and attacked by the powers that be as a means to discredit it as hard as possible, since it has and continues to be the most relevant form of kryptonite to capitalism. Now, granted, Marx and Engels got some things wrong. They're not gods after all. However, Marxism has evolved and advanced a great deal in the last 150 years. From Lenin to Stalin, from Castro to Mao, from Guevara to Kim Il-sung, from Luxemburg to Kollontai, all of these figures and thinkers share a common history which constitutes the struggle of the oppressed against oppressors. And through their theory and practice, through their errors and excesses, their successes and wins, they have all made their own respective contributions and expansions to the theory. All these figures adhere to a common political theory, and they all share common history. We all share a common history. And just because there's a name attached to that shared history, that does not by design make it inherently unscientific or worth rejecting, just because there's a stigma associated with the name. As stated earlier, Einstein's theory of relativity and Darwin's theory of evolution are not unscientific because we have attached names to them. But we do so precisely because those names provide an association with a given body of facts and or knowledge. The Zeitgeisters and Venus projectors apply the scientific method to social analysis, and as a result, whether they like to acknowledge it or not, they have come to many very similar conclusions that Marxists have. And for that, I applaud them. It's like, we have all this groundwork, we have all this research and theory that's on the ground. It's like if I were to come along and start studying astrophysics, and instead of going through like hundreds of tomes of literature and spending hours and hours researching astrophysics, I'm like, nah, fuck that. I sweep it all off the table and I start from scratch. And I come to a lot of very similar and same conclusions all on my own. And I eventually come to like relativity without actually going through the literature. Do you know how hard that is? It's a miracle that people are able to break out of this psychology without studying Marxism. So like for that, I applaud them. Like that's not an easy feat. So like, I mean, yeah, good job. Like I applaud you guys. Marx applauded socialists of his day who achieved something similar. There were socialists that came to all the same conclusions he did through the research, and he applauded them for it. So for that, again, I have nothing but respect for that. Like that is not an easy feat to do. So anyways, so let's go through these reasons, these little bullet points. So the truth is that rather than trying to distance yourself from the shared common history, you would actually benefit a great deal more by embracing it and acknowledging it for a number of reasons. Number one, reactionaries are inherently dishonest people, and they're going to draw this so-called prima facie association, whether you like it or not. They're bad faith actors. They don't give a fuck. They're not intellectually honest. Even if you don't associate with communism, they're going to lump you in regardless because they're dishonest. Number two, the history of communism and Marxism is so heavily demonized because the wealthy and powerful own and control all of the media by which we consume. And that communism is, once again, their kryptonite. So it's within their interests to paint as negative of a picture as possible of these movements and this shared history. Number three, it is, once again, a reaffirmation of the status quo hegemony. By distancing yourself from the communist movement in history, you are silently admitting that all of the lies and propaganda that they say about that history is true. You're saying that it is true, like that communism sounds good in theory, but in practice it leads to dictatorship, mass murder, and disaster. That it ruined lives, that it killed 100 bajillion people, that Venezuela, iPhones, mustache man, bad. You are reaffirming it silently by constantly trying to distance yourself and never addressing it. And number four, by not knowing the history, you won't be able to address their successes and failures and learn from them. After all, those who don't learn their history are doomed to repeat it. So even if they were failures, let's say they were, let's buy into their narrative for a second. It's not true, and we'll get to that in a second, but you are, I mean, you could at very least learn what not to do. You could learn what not to do from them, and you could study. That way, you know, if it was true that it just led to evil, bejeevil dictatorship, well, now we know to avoid that, and now we know how to make sure that doesn't happen because we've actually properly studied on the history. So, But my main point is, if you actually study your history, you won't even need to do that. But by not studying your history and just granting that it's all true, and just by being that charitable to the enemy, you are capitulating to the enemy. This does nothing positive for you. Not only is the propaganda bullshit and easily refutable in the first place, on the contrary, it's actually a much stronger and much more principled position to be acting from when your mindset is that of these regimes and movements weren't perfect. They were flawed. They were a product of their conditions. But despite that, they still massively improved people's lives, saved a great deal more people than they killed, and had they remained liberal, had they remained capitalist, had they just gone with business as usual, as compared to the positions that they were all like, basically they would have made way better progress than had they stayed liberal capitalism and gone with business as usual. Soviet Union would have never became an industrial superpower. Mao's China would have never become an industrial superpower. All these socialist countries wouldn't have made the achievements and growth and improvements in the quality of life that they had. They wouldn't have massively improved people's lives, saving many lives in the process, and doing a great deal of good for their people. The communist movements of old pulled roughly 1 billion people from the medieval era, and that's a fact. And that same growth and development would not have transpired had they maintained business as usual. This is a much more principled position to be acting from, as opposed to the position that they were all just phonies and that they were all fake communists and it all just failed and ended in disaster. And yet somehow you, a person who has only a rudimentary knowledge of this history, who isn't a hardened revolutionary thinker, somehow believes that if you were in their shoes, that you would have ushered in the circular city Venus Project resource-based utopia. Think about it. So, in summary of the segments, there are some points that I'd like to make. Let's go ahead and go through the summary. So, number of points that I'd like to summarize. Number one, you don't know better than Marx, Lenin, Castro, etc. You don't know better than these thinkers. I'm sorry. And it's an arrogant presumption to make that somehow that all these hardened revolutionaries and thinkers who wrote volume after volume on this subject, discussing and participating in theory and practice, struggling for a better tomorrow, they all somehow got it wrong. But on the contrary, you've got it all figured out, but they don't, and that it's not really worth studying and reading from these figures. Hopefully that's not your position. I don't want to assume anything about your positions. I'm just saying if that is your position, it's an arrogant one to have. And that you, on the contrary, actually have a great deal to learn by studying these thinkers, because you can learn their tactics, their theory, their practice. You can identify good ideas from bad ideas. I'm telling you, reading theory, you have a lot, and I mean a lot, to gain by reading theory. Like, I'm serious. Like, you would benefit massively if you started going through Marxist literature. So that's the first point. And the second point, when you learn the real history about these countries, learning said real history will make convincing people of the cause a lot easier, because you're able to actually address what happened from a scientific lens, clear the air of the bullshit, and explain to people that they didn't fail. They actually didn't. And that they've been lied to their entire lives. You'll be able to debunk lies. You'll be able to make points about the Soviets and Mao's China. You'll be able to say that though both countries started off as these agrarian, semi-feudal backwaters with populations constituting 70% or more peasantry, within a few short decades, utilizing central planning, they were able to pull hundreds of millions of people from the medieval era, practically doubling life expectancy, massively elevating living standards, and rapidly hypercharging their economic developments, and providing their people with a constitutional right to a job, healthcare, education, and housing. Things that you don't have a constitutional right to under capitalism. They gave these things to their people for free, basically. USSR would go on to build power plants, usher in the space age, stop the march of the genocidal Nazi horde, and go toe-to-toe with the United States for decades, the most powerful empire the world has ever known. Mao set China on the path to becoming a world superpower, and as now the modern-day People's Republic of China, though far from socialist, still utilizes a great deal of state planning and investment to build its infrastructure and improve the quality of life, and currently construct the Belt and Road Initiative, a hyperloop of sorts running from Russia into Europe, through Europe into the Mediterranean Sea, through the Middle East into Africa, and then back to China. And barring a handful of examples, virtually every country which has had a socialist revolution and went communist, virtually every single one of them has seen huge surges in growth, dramatic betterments and improvement in living standards and improvements in the quality of life. And in virtually every instance, virtually every time, they consistently outperform capitalist countries of similar starting points and similar conditions, similar geography. Like, compare, Cuba to Haiti, their next door neighbor, or North Korea to Nepal, or India to China, or Brazil to Russia, or the Central American Soviet Socialist republics to their Middle Eastern neighbors. Under virtually every instance, the socialist countries consistently outperform the capitalist counterparts. They consistently grow faster, provide higher wages, better living standards, just better quality of life in general. I mean, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but my point is that it did work. My summary is that it did work. And the idea that 20th century socialism ended up in tyranny and failure is a meme. Like, the idea that these people didn't have any freedom to speak of was just a meme. These countries actually did do a great deal of good for their people and realized outcomes which would have never been realized had they stayed capitalist. And a lot of the problems that they faced had less to do with the communist system and more to do with imperialist encirclements, the nonstop harassments and undermining done by said imperialist encirclements, and the relatively backward starting conditions from which these nations were operating under in the first place. So, again, it had less to do with the communist system and more to do with the economic modes which existed prior to the communist system, which gave them such a shitty starting points to act from. Because Marx predicted that the revolutions would come in the advanced, in first world, industrialized, wealthy countries. In this way, he was very Eurocentric in his analysis. We did get revolutions, but we did not get them from the wealthy first world. We got them from the backwaters, the periphery, the colonized world, the places in the world where people were at their most desperate, their most exploited, their most backward, and where capitalist psychology and ego was least ingrained and entrenched into the culture. So that's where the revolutions have come historically. And this is part of the reason why, like, communism failed. It had less to do with the communist system and more to do with the economic systems and starting conditions that these countries were operating under. But anyways, point number 3. You have a great deal to gain by learning and reading the works from these figures. That is, how to do socialism, how to organize, tactics, where correct and incorrect ideas come from, how to identify correct and incorrect ideas, how to interpret theory, and how to be a good political scientist. Reading theory will make you a good political scientist. Point number 4. You have the truth on your side. You don't need to lie to people. You don't need to manipulate anyone into seeing the way you do, into falling into your world outlook, because fundamentally, it's based on scientific observation and reality. The reason why fascists and the far right have to constantly rebrand themselves is because they need to constantly distance themselves from previous iterations of their shitty ideology. They have to distance themselves from fascism. So you'll never hear a fascist in the modern day, or you'll very rarely hear them call themselves fascists or Nazis. They won't. They have to distance themselves. They call themselves Nordicists, white identitarians, Western chauvinists, classical liberal, anarcho-capitalist. They'll come up with all these other brands to rebrand because they have to. I mean, fucking just look at Peter Joseph's debate with Stefan Molyneux. All Molyneux could do is employ rhetorical tricks and tactics and sophistry to make a case for his world outlook, because it's fundamentally not based on reality. We don't have to do that. We don't have to distance ourselves. We don't have to use sophistry or try to lie or manipulate people. We have the truth on our side. We don't need to lie, gaslight, manipulate, or hypnotize anybody into following our ideas. We just simply need to explain these correct ideas to people in a easy to comprehend manner and showcase why these ideas are correct and present the facts, examples, data, and statistics to demonstrate why they're correct in the first place. So yeah. And this brings me to my final point, number 5. Reiteration. There's nothing unscientific about using names to describe things. We literally do it all the fucking time. If you think you know better than the Marxists, prove it. Prove it by explaining why the Marxist position is wrong. Don't just write it off as unscientific. Actually go through the literature, go through the theory, and explain why the Marxists have it all wrong. You want to take us on, you think you know better than we do, explain it. Go through the literature. Go through why we're wrong, please. I encourage you. I'm open to criticism. So yeah. Once again, last thing I'll say in summary of this segment is it's easy and it's tempting to distance oneself from the socialist movement and this shared socialist history that we all have. However, it's especially tempting when you look at previous examples of socialism and they don't measure up to the expectations. You know, we have this idealized vision of what socialism ought to be, and then we look at the projects and they don't measure up to this idealized vision. They didn't achieve this ideal vision because, you know, conditions are rarely ideal for anything in the real world. And instead, these countries were operating under the conditions they found themselves in, and they did the best they could under the conditions that they had to deal with. So, and despite that, they still moved light years further than had they stayed capitalist, is my point. So, as long as we live in a global imperialist world, as long as the United States or the great Satan reigns supreme, as long as the socialist movement remains in the lull that it is, that's not about to change. So really, it's the great Satan that needs to come down, and hopefully we can get something off the ground before Russia and China fill up the power vacuum. So yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Actually, let's read some comments. Why do you say people who say that Marxism is bull? But I'm sorry. Why do you say that Marxism is BU, but definition not scientific, because Marxism is prescriptive, but science is descriptive? I'm sorry. Prescriptive. I don't know what that word means. Prescription, written in a direction and order for the preparing and use of medicine. All I'm going to say is that it's not an exact science, but it is a social science nonetheless, because all of the observations, I mean, it's basically the culmination of the scientific thought process applied to social analysis. And even if you didn't identify with Marxism or socialism, I'm telling you right now, just if you don't even use that literature and you just go and apply the scientific method to political economy and history, you're going to come to a lot of conclusions that are extremely similar to Marxists most of the time. Usually they just say history proved it's a failed theory. How many fascists call themselves libertarian? Have you noticed that? Yes, it is very common. Fascists constantly do that. So let me close out some windows and we'll go to the next slide. Let me open up slides 6, 7, and 8. That works. Have you noticed that PATSOCs that are pro operate under the same capitalism as NATO? Yeah, that's not too relevant. Like I said, we can meme on them later, but right now, let's do this. So, here we are. Criticism number 2. The rejection of politics is leaving the Zeitgeist movement dead in the water. So what do I mean by this? I mean that Zeitgeist people reject the political struggle, or they reject all political labels. They reject politics, period. They reject politics, just the act of politics in and of itself. Peter Joseph has recently started a podcast known as Revolution Now, where he talks about world events and does social commentary from a progressive, sustainability, pro-peace perspective. I tune in from time to time, and I like a lot of what he has to say. But again, the Zeitgeisters say their movement isn't political in nature. Oh, how they are wrong. It is very political in nature. Politics everywhere. It's literally all around us. You will never escape from it no matter how hard you try. They say they reject politics, that they are anti-political. However, I find it very funny and ironic that this is their statement about politics, but Peter Joseph is running a podcast known as Revolution Now, when a revolution is inherently a very violent and political move. It's a very violent and political act of force. It is the means by which an oppressed group of people overthrows the oppressors in a direct, violent fashion, and then oppress those oppressors and take away the oppressor's ability to oppress them back. So it's basically they're taking away the freedom of the minority to restrict the freedom of others. So that is inherently a very violent, oppressive act. So I'm not saying that revolutions inherently have to lead to civil war, but at the very least, you need the threat of violence and a great deal of coercion on your side. And where does that come from? It comes from having militias, workers' militias. It comes from having a Red Army. And you need a large enough percentage of the population sympathetic to that violence to believe the use of that violence and force is legitimate and justified. So Zeitgeisters, Venus projectors, they got this idea in their heads that their movements isn't political in nature, that it's all just about sustainability, and that if we could just convince the world in this peaceful fashion that our ideas are correct, we can fight for short-term reforms to improve people's lives and try to sell the general public on the benefits of a more sustainable world. Hopefully, we can inch our way to a resource-based economy. The problem with this is that underlying politics is a great deal of violence. Underlying politics is violence, force, and coercion inherently. It's just an inherent part of it. For the whole point of a political system is to resolve disputes between battling factions without the direct use of guns and armies. Instead, you have a legal apparatus, and you have to act within this legal apparatus and adhere to our will if we win in the arena. Because if you don't, we'll lock you up, we'll shoot you dead. That's basically how it works. So, I lost my place. Hold on. Basically, politics is violence without the violence. And the truth is that we live in a class-based society with clear lines between workers and owners, first worlders, third worlders, the wealthy and powerful, and those without wealth and power. So we see divides within nations, we see divides between nations. And class is a global phenomenon, not just a national phenomenon. And that for the top 1% of the population, for the top 1% of the population, actual political and economic democracy runs directly against the currents. I'm sorry. I need to take a break. I need a drink of water. I've been talking like nonstop for the last hour, So, for the top 1% of the population, for the ruling class, actual political and economic democracy runs directly against their interests. And thus, it is within their material interests to keep things exactly the way they are so that they can keep making money and stay in power. And, you guys all know this, but I'm bringing this up to make a point. And the point is that you will never convince them that it is within their interests to do a resource-based economy. The utopian socialists of old, which predate Marx and Engels, thought that they could convince the world, and irrevocably every time they failed. Historically, the ruling class has never stepped down or given up their wealth peacefully or without a fight. And there's no reason to think that they will do it now, considering the colossal amounts of violence and oppression that they routinely employ to maintain global capitalism today. All the people that have poverty enforced on them, all the people that suffer and die because of the system, all the people that get bombed to death and starved to death in wars and the United States genocidal sanctions, they're all part of a larger project. And you will never convince these people that it's within their interest to do a resource-based economy. So, what does that leave us with? It leaves us with the political struggle. You can't reject the political struggle. You can't reject the class struggle. And by extension, you can't reject the political struggle, because class struggle and political struggle are part of the same whole. You can't, we live in a class-based society, and you have to do class struggle, and you have to fight for working class interests in order to overcome the ruling class. I've read in the New Human Rights Movement, Peter Joseph be kind of sympathetic to the rich, saying that they're victims in all of this too. I don't really see it that way. I see them as the number one benefactors. These people are extremely educated. They realize what's going on in the world. They're aware. Of course they're aware. But the thing is that our political and economic system rewards people for being like the most psychopathic. Nobody becomes a billionaire without breaking some laws, stepping on some toes, and crushing mountains of skulls beneath their feet. It just doesn't happen. So these people are basically menaces. They're psychopaths, and they have to be stopped. That's basically the general idea. And they are the number one obstacle, one of the number one obstacles that we have to contend with. So you can't reject the political struggle. It's a colossal mistake to do so, because by doing so, it means sitting on the fence post passively, standing for nothing, and relegating yourself to being impotent windbags on the side who are always critiquing and advocating, but never doing or taking up action to directly fight the machine. It's the same mistake that early socialist thinkers have been making for centuries. Rather than trying to fight and overthrow the system, they only simply want to escape it, reform it, and or win in the realm of debate through making idealistic appeals. Otherwise, what's going to happen when there's a real... Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. I keep having brain farts. Otherwise, what's going to happen if we have a revolutionary working class movement? What's going to happen if we have a workers' movement? And are you just going to sit on the fence post? Like, oh, they're engaging in violence. They call themselves socialists and communists. Let's say there's a revolutionary action going on. Are you just going to sit on the fence post while they're engaged in the struggle? They say they want the same thing you do, and they're actively fighting for it. I mean, are you just going to sit on the fence post and just meditate because we don't engage in violence? Food for thought. And one final point that I want to enforce is, again, everything is political. Politics is all around us. It's in our TV shows that we like to watch. It's in the music we listen to. It's in the books that we read, the media we consume. It's on the news. It's everywhere, literally everywhere. Even the things that you don't think are political, much of the time are political. I had a conversation with my girl about Black Lives Matter. She says Black Lives Matter is not political. And I'm like, it very fucking much is. And I tell her everything is political. She's like, no, everything's not political. Me being black is not political. I'm like, yes, it is. We live in a bloodthirsty, genocidal, white supremacist settler colonial project that is statistically discriminating against your demographic. It's very much political. They want your blood. They want your oppression. Straight up. That's the way it is. Everything is political. There is no escaping politics. So, more threads. What is called authoritarian in this society is just anything done by anyone without the consent and endorsements of the capitalists. Exactly. Authoritarianism is a huge meme. Every state exercises authority. Every movement exercises authority. Everyone utilizes it to some degree or another. And the only reason some states have to use it more than others is because they are not able to as efficiently bribe and manipulate the populace into consent with their shitty system. Like, That's why America has this great illusion of freedom. They can buy the illusion with social peace and the spoils of imperialist plunder. But look what will happen once we have a big socialist uprising going on. You know, that's when the claws come out. Hell, the claws come out whenever there's peaceful protesting. Remember the Black Lives Matter protesting, guys? During the Black Lives Matter protests, they were sending cops with riot gear and guns and shields and all sorts of shit and tanks and tear gas, fucking gassing peaceful protesters, beating down, clubbing peaceful protesters, hustling and shoving people around. There are, like, I'm talking hours long compilations of cops brutalizing people over the course of peaceful protests. So the idea that the United States government doesn't crack down and exercise authoritarianism, the whole thing about freedom is a total meme. Like freedom in the abstract, it's a total fucking meme, and it's just a way to fucking silence the discourse over the subject. I recommend a side hustle to learning communist theory, and that is an education in biology or engineering, something that has a body of knowledge and practical application. Political science be tricky. I agree. People should learn skills outside of politics. I mean, communist theory is a great way to spend your time, but it should not be the only way that you spend your time. So, criticism number 3, great analysis, great ideas, poor theory, poor plan to action. So, let's talk about that. So, according to the Zeitgeist movements, or at least from what I can recall, they have effectively a 3-step plan to action, which can be summarized as follows. Number 1, the awareness phase, or the spreading of their ideas, seed planting, so to speak. Number 2, the cultivation of critical mass, or the development of larger groups, coalitions, and orgs. Number 3, the overturning of the capitalist system, or ideally, the peaceful transition towards a resource-based economy. This, again, I'm paraphrasing here. This all sounds handy and dandy on paper. It's a very simple process. I might be getting certain things wrong, but this is the general idea of what they want to do, or a basic path to their plan of action. So I have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to the Zeitgeisters. But before I do, I am going to take a real quick break. I'll be right back. I'm going to go grab me some agua and some coffee. Do not leave, comrades. I will be right back. And we are back. We are back. Let me scarf down the slice of pizza and we'll get it going. All right. Let's get going. All right. So I have a number of questions for RBE advocates. And you can write an email if you'd like. You can write me an email, but here are the questions and how they go. All right. So number one, in detail. How in the world do you plan on your movements successfully overturning capitalism and establishing an RBE? Like ideally, how would it happen, like in your mind? How do you think? Number two, how do you plan on opposing the system without engaging in political struggle or violent struggle of any kind? Number three, if you don't plan on taking and holding state power, then how do you plan on implementing and constructing a resource-based economy? You kind of need a state to exert political will. Number four, if you do plan on taking state power, how do you plan on doing so peacefully when the deck is stacked against you in the political arena and the state as it exists now is structured and designed specifically and exclusively to accommodate the needs of the ruling class? Number five, is revolution off the table? How committed are you to your non-violent principles when it takes violence for workers to win and overthrow the ruling class? And when the ruling class routinely unleashes violence on the workers to maintain their grip on power, especially when you consider that whatever violence is needed by the workers to overthrow capitalism and depose the ruling class will by design entail exponentially less violence in the long term than the violence it needs to maintain the upkeep of capitalism. Number six, which actions of opposition are acceptable to you? Is peaceful protesting and civil disobedience the only way? What about striking? What about industrial sabotage, expropriating the means of production, occupying government buildings, outright guerrilla warfare? Where do you draw the line? Number seven, if hard violence action is all off the table, even under a situation where the ruling class unleashes the army to suppress us, what will you do in response? Number eight, what about transition towns, microfactories, local communal sustainability? Can these things be built up to help the cause? Well, they certainly have a role to play in providing workers with socialistic non-market means of subsistence, which is desperately needed, especially here in America. Number nine, what will you do when the state inevitably comes to crack down on your communes, transition towns, and local sustainability projects? Just lie down and accept it? See points 5 and 6. Number 10, assuming you do take power, how will you organize society during the transition until a global RBE is complete? How will you go about organizing the government? Who is the leader? How are leaders picked? Will the governments be leaderless? Will there be no elections? The Venus Project says that they're not democratic, but they also say they're not a dictatorship, even though the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. How do you structure such a government? What will the transition look like? So these are the questions, and I don't believe they're on screen, but I'm going to go ahead and put these questions on screen and run through them again for you. So again, Zeitgeisters, Venus Projectors, here are the questions. Email me here. You can email your answers here at xandermeyerso.com, at gmail.com. You can write me an essay or you can do a video response, but here's a quick summary of the questions. I'm going to go ahead and leave that on screen for a moment while I read comments. I mean, not necessarily. I just consider them utopian socialists. So yeah. Again, Questions for you Zeitgeist Venus Project advocates. Leave this on screen for about another minute. And I'm going to go shut my door. Actually, no, I'm not. So yeah, how do you plan on overturning capitalism? How do you oppose and overthrow the system without engaging in any sort of violence? If you don't plan on taking and holding state power, how will you protect your new system and exert your political will? If you do plan on taking state power, how do you plan on doing so peacefully when the odds are stacked against you? Is revolution completely off the table? Which reforms and actions are acceptable to you? If hard, violent action of any kind is off the table, even under a situation where the ruling class unleashes the army, what will your movement do in response? What about transition towns, microfactories, local communal sustainability? Could these be used to help the cause? If you build up a bunch of communes, microfactories, and sustainability facilities independent of capitalism, what will you do when the state inevitably comes to crack down? Assuming you do take state power, how will you organize society during the transition? Again, email me at xandermyerso@gmail.com. I will be saving my email in the link description as well. But yes, here it is, xandermyerso@gmail.com. You can email me here, or you can make a video response. Up to you. Oh, so there is a slides option. That's pretty cool. Wish I knew that earlier. Sorry, guys. This was a poorly organized stream. So, this is some tough love time for my Venus Project people here. A little tough love time. Nothing personal. You don't have to answer these now, but I would appreciate a written response or video essay by any resource-based economy advocate. I would like to engage in a dialectic, if you will. But these are the kinds of questions which reared their heads around the time that I became an anarcho-communist some years back. I haven't found any good answer to these questions within the literature or the advocacy of the Zeitgeist movement or Venus Project, though I may not be looking hard enough. I've read the Zeitgeist movement defined, I've read the New Human Rights Movement, I've watched all of Peter Joseph's lectures, I've watched a bunch of lectures by Jacques Fresco, all of the documentaries, and in none of it was I able to find good answers to these questions. And to me, it just seems like the idea is that society is just going to collapse and that people will just magically wake up and realize one day that capitalism was bad and that was what was wrong the whole time. And that when the day comes, I guess the Zeitgeisters and Venus projectors will be there to step in and do a resource-based economy, to make a resource-based economy. And that class conscious and the political will for the masses to follow along will just appear out of nowhere. Like people will just magically realize the error of their ways and realize we need to do socialism. Couple quick points. It takes more than immiseration and turmoil by itself for people to want to do socialism. All society collapse does is generate anti-establishment sentiments and dissatisfaction with current conditions. These sentiments could certainly be channeled into a socialist path. On the other hand, they could just as easily be hijacked by opportunists or even worse, fascists, and used to materialize and justify some extremely fucked up shit, taking the public in the opposite direction of socialism. It's happened in the past and it can happen again. See Nazi Germany. How do you plan on fighting these undercurrents without taking a side in the political arena or against fascism? There have been multiple points in the past where capitalism has been on its death throes and the opportunity for a new society comes into question. RBE advocates say that capitalism will just inevitably fail. Well, guess what? It already has numerous times. Capitalism has failed in Eastern Europe before World War I and after World War I. It failed during the Great Depression. It failed during the stock panics of the 1850s and 1870s. It failed around most of the world and is continuing to fail around most of the world. It was about to fail again in the 1970s until neoliberalism happened. And in the wake of rampant inflation, ecological decline, climate change, global coronavirus, it's beginning to fail again as we speak. So far, all the ruling class can do, and has done, is create new reproduction schemes to extend the lifespan of the system for a couple more decades. And all we can do is take advantage of these weak points, and when civil unrest is at its greatest, when the cracks in the system are showing. All we can do is take advantage of these weak points to seize power. And how do you plan on accomplishing such a feat when push comes to shove? Again, no good answers. All I'm getting at here is that these people, all I'm getting from the Zeitgeist people is that things are just going to get bad, and the logic for the new system will just spontaneously become obvious, and people will naturally and organically realize the errors of their ways and want to do an RBE. Even though this has never, ever been shown to be the case, ever. The truth is that without proper theory and practice, without the guidance of the communists or organizing, without the conscious, deliberate push from the masses towards without the conscious, deliberate push from the masses towards that brighter future, people are far more likely to blindly walk off a cliff into oblivion than they are to do the right thing that makes the most sense. Human beings are not inherently rational, logical, and scientific. These are learned behavioral traits which need to be taught to people. And while I appreciate that the Zeitgeist and Venus Project is trying to do this, what I don't appreciate is the fence post sitting, the passivity, and the weak theory, and the rejection of the political struggle. Again, the ideas are all really good. It all sounds great on paper, but without practice, a plan to action, or the deliberate push on the part of the educated class-conscious workers to do such a thing will never happen, not in a million years, not in a billion years. So in short, the Zeitgeist movement and Venus Project desperately need to learn how they are going to muster the political will needed to take society in that direction. It's a complicated question. There's a lot of debate over that said question, a lot of debate over what is to be done, which brings me to my final point. Not to mention the fact that if your basis in revolutionary theory is weak, you are still prone to falling prey to the same mass hysteria that the public does and continues to do on a routine basis, as well as opportunism, individualism, and liberalism and reactionarism. If you don't read theory, and if your foundation in political theory is weak, you are going to very likely be prone to falling prey to these massive pitfalls which have claimed many socialists in the past and have fucked over many movements. And there are many examples of this happening. You know, ultra-leftism, individualism, revisionism, opportunism. These are trends that need to be identified and countered, because if a movement falls prey to them, it will despoil and ruin the whole movement. I mean, case in point, Peter Joseph condoning Joe Biden, and by extension, condoning a right-wing neoliberal bourgeois party, just because he fell for the orange man bad meme. This is the kind of shit that we as revolutionary thinkers should be above. And it just goes to show it's such an easy pitfall when you don't study theory and when you don't have like a comprehensive scientific plan to action. You fall into pitfalls like that. Peter Joseph falling for the orange man bad meme. So again, reading theory will make you better at identifying these trends so that you don't fall prey to them yourself, and they will also allow you to gain the conscious ability to root them out and call them out when your neighbors and comrades fall prey to it. And thus, without theory, you're prone to slipping into these pitfalls and making the same mistakes that revolutionaries have been making for centuries. And the price of falling prey to these mistakes ultimately undermines and sabotages the movements. So that's it. Again, that's the importance of reading theory. And again, people will not magically wake up one day when push comes to shove and things get bad enough and they'll just automatically know what to do. That's not the way it works. People have to be educated and brought to that point. And it'll become easier and easier to do that because people will become increasingly dissatisfied with things as are. But again, dissatisfaction and the spontaneity of the masses alone are not enough. Read what is to be done. So that's pretty much the end of my criticism. Pretty much the end. Let's go ahead and get to the final segments of this essay. Close some things out. God damn it. Final segments, because I have some advice for my resource-based economic friends. Some advice, my friends. Let us go ahead and go through it. So, speaking of which, an audience member asked where to get started. What you are seeing on screen right now is some recommended literature, and I'm going to give you guys a summary of said literature. So, start reading theory. Not just Marxist theory, but historical theory in general. It will improve your understanding of the materialist world outlook. It will improve your rhetorical and debate skills and make you better at political scientists overall. I host weekly readings in my Discord if you're interested in getting started, linked in the description below. These readings transpire at 6 p.m. Eastern on both Saturday and Sunday evenings, hosted by my mod Eco-Marxist as well as myself whenever I can make it. This is a free public resource which works to your benefit. I highly recommend you tag along because Marxism is a complex subject which requires us to tackle it as a group rather than on an individual basis. Start reading about and learning the true history of actually existing socialism. So I'll be reading off the list and describing these books in detail and their relevance. But first, know that you can find PDFs and links to all of this work within my Discord, linked in the description below. There are going to be people there that can provide you the PDF links, and I will be able to do it as well for most of these works. Otherwise, you can also Google them and look for the PDF online as well. Most of these PDFs are on the internet, so you got that. So let's go ahead and go through these books, comrades. Starting with the history. If you're new to the subject, you can't go wrong with Black Shirts and Reds. Black Shirts and Reds is probably one of the best introductory books to this topic I think you can read, by Parenti. It's a really simple read. It's not even 200 pages. You could get through it in an evening. Triumph of Evil by Austin Murphy, another great introduction to the subject of communism. Parenti talks more about the USSR and just the general Eastern Europe, and he also talks about fascism. Murphy, on the other hand, talks about he goes in to outline and examine East Germany in detail, using it as a model for explaining why socialism does work, while explaining why all the Western powers were actually the bad guys in the Cold War and what we can do about it now that communism's gone. Triumph of Evil and Black Shirts and Reds and Socialism Betrayed are probably the three best introductory books you're going to get. So the Red Flag is an overview of the history of communism from Marx all the way up to present day, from Priestland. I don't really know where you can find a PDF of this one. You might have to order it, but admittedly, it's from a liberal perspective. You're getting a right-wing perspective when you go through this book, but it is relatively objective. It's a relatively objective analysis, so I still advise that you read it. Socialist unemployment. We're getting more into theory here. This talks about the economy of Yugoslavia and where things went wrong in Yugoslavia, and it goes in to explain the problems of market socialism and why market socialism is not the path forward. So for theoretical reasons, I recommend Socialist Unemployment. It'll give you a good overview of Yugoslavia and their economic issues. Fraud, Famine, and Fascism by Tottle, Stalinist Terror, New Perspectives, and Stalin, History and Criticism of the Black Legend. These three books will give you a pretty good overview of the Stalin era, debunking a lot of right-wing, like far-right fascist talking points, because there's just a lot of bullshit and smearing that's been done about Stalin. Point of these books is not to make him out to be an angel. Point of these books is they are by no means apologia. They are just good books that give you an objective history stance and expose a lot of the lies and bullshit. And you'll learn where a lot of the anti-communist mythology comes from. And these guys go through it. Another view of Stalin and Blood Lies by Grover Furr are two other books that I would recommend on the subject. They'll both give you some good. The only reason I don't recommend Grover Furr as much is because he is very, very pro-Stalin. Like, he's like president of his fan club. But if you ignore his rhetoric and you just look at what he presents, his works cited is legit. His research checks out. So Grover Furr is legit. Luda Martin's legit. Those are other two good books. But for the purposes of brevity, I just recommend what you see on the list. So, is the red flag flying? This gives you an overview of the history of the post-Stalin USSR and addresses a lot of the criticisms of the post-Stalin USSR. and it gives you a good overview of basically their economy, their foreign policy, and what life was actually like in Eastern Europe. Towards the Unknown Cultural Revolution debunks a bunch of right-wing lies about the Cultural Revolution under Mao. I think that's a goodie. Lastly, Towards the New Socialism under Cockshot. For those of you who really want to, if you don't really care that much about history and you just want a good model as to what socialism ought to look like in the future, I would go through Towards the New Socialism, because Cockshot, I think, has a lot of really valid criticisms of the USSR, where they went wrong from like an economic and political policy standpoint, what we can learn and take away from it, and providing an alternative model, which is basically cyber communism with ancient Greek democracy characteristics. Now let's talk about the literature. Literature on Marxist theory. Know that everything here are short works except for Capital Volume 1. Principles of Communism, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and State and Revolution. These 3 books are probably the best introduction you are going to get on the subject matter. And looking at this, I realized that I should have inserted On Authority, because someone mentioned authoritarianism earlier, and I think the best work by Engels to address the concerns about authority and big government tyranny is On Authority. So just pretend On Authority is on that list. On Authority. Pretend it's on the list. So yeah, On Authority, Principles of Communism, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, State and Revolution. They're all super short works. Begin with those. Imperialism by Lenin. He goes in to describe the advent of economic imperialism as it is developed as of a stage of capitalist development, the stage of capitalist developments that we're still living in to this day. Next, we have Right of a Nation to Self-Determination by Lenin. He goes in to describe self-determination, land back, decolonization, a lot of really good principles in Right to Self-Determination. Economic Problems of the USSR, another good theory book. Stalin goes in to address a lot of the criticisms from the left made of the Soviet economy, mainly concerning commodity production, among other issues. And Stalin basically explains like why they maintained commodity production and why they didn't take it as far as what Marx and Engels envisioned, and how commodity production can exist in socialism. He addresses criticisms from the right, mainly coming from the likes of Bukharin. And ultimately, if you want to know why the Soviets economically went down the path that they did, read this book. It'll give you a good idea. Where Do Good and Correct Ideas Come From? Opposed Book Worship by Mao. Both very short works, but very important works nonetheless. Help with your critical thinking skills, help with your organizational skills. Good starter books. Critique of the Gotha Program. Marx criticizes moderate socialists of his day and social democrats of his day. I recommend you read everything from start to finish, from front to back, including the preface and the foreword, because it'll give you additional context around what he wrote, as well as like a general idea of what early stage socialism should look like. Wage, Labor, and Capital, Value, Price, and Profit. Before you finally crack open Capital and really dig deep into Marx's critique of political economy, I recommend you start with those 2, because they're excellent primers for Capital Volume 1. And then lastly, all 3 volumes of Capital, and pretty much all 3 volumes of Capital and Anti-Düring. Although those aren't on the list, I recommend them. And you go through all 4 of them. They'll take a while to get through because they're pretty lengthy, but pretty much everything here, from On Authority to Principles of Communism, all the way down to Value, Price, and Profit. Do not be intimidated by this list. All of these works are relatively short. Many of them you could read in like an hour. I'm just saying this is like a good starter pack for theory. If you read and you get through everything on both lists, this will give you a very, very strong foundation and comprehension, and it'll make you a much better political scientist, much better debater, and a much better revolutionary thinker. So I recommend these books. Next slide. Now let's talk about practice. What you're seeing right here are different forms of resistance, as I have categorized them in this list, ranging from the most passive and most legal to the most active and illegal forms of political violence, or lack thereof. What is deemed most legitimate and illegitimate. So, before we begin, I want to preface with this. Before I read to describe these categories, I just want to state that I am not advocating that you go out and do anything that is on this list that is against the law or a deliberately violent threat. If you are going to go out, keep all of your advocacy legal and within the bounds of the law. Don't go out and do anything illegal, and don't take this as me advocating that you go out and you do anything illegal. I am not doing this. Keep all of your advocacy within the law. If you go out, attend a protest, participate in an action that is illegal and you know is illegal, and then you proceed to get caught and arrested, you're a fucking moron. All right, done prefacing. I'm mainly doing that so this video doesn't get pulled. But yeah, doubling down, not advocating for violence, just explaining the phenomenon. Keep that in mind. So, forms of political action. So, again, this list, we got the form of violence from the most passive to active. The more active the form of violence, the more effective it is in beating back your political enemies and basically directly oppressing and defeating them. But the less passive, vice versa. Legality. Basically, the likelihood that you're going to get arrested doing this action. So, electoralism. You're not going to get elected you're very likely not going to get arrested for doing anything from 1 to 2 on this list. Public assembly, demonstration. There's a very, very high likelihood you will never be arrested doing 1 or 2. 3, maybe. 4 and above, more likely. Everything from 5 to 7 is a definite yes. 3 to 4 is a maybe. 1 to 2 is a no. Legitimate. So most people are not class conscious. Most people are operating on autopilot. Many people will never be revolutionary throughout the course of their lives. So this is the optics section, public perception. The further up the list you go, from electoralism to charity drives, these things are completely legitimate. You're not going to alienate or remove yourself from anybody doing so. Conversely, engaging in insurrection, guerrilla warfare, terrorism will be seen as illegitimate, and you will not have the sympathy of the public in doing so. There is a caveat to this, which I want to identify. What is deemed legitimate and illegitimate isn't just by the state. I'm referring to mainly by the state, but also public perception. Depending on the level of class consciousness, the amount of civil unrest, and how sympathetic people are to your ideas, that will also affect this legitimacy scale. So if you have a public where you live in a failed state, everyone's miserable, and nobody's got food, it's, you're in the middle of a war, and it's just a severe crisis, and the system's clearly failing, people are going to be a lot more sympathetic to the alternative. So what you're going to have under those less stable times is the more extreme acts of violence are going to be seen as more legitimate because the public sympathizes with it. That's what it's all about. The degree that the public will be sympathetic and the conditions which will lead to that sympathy. Lastly, we have the reformist and revolutionary scale. In the box and out of the box. The further up the scale, the less potent the outcome is going to be. If you use 1 and 2, you might get a law passed here, you'll get a politician elected there, you might get some reforms or some new laws in the books, but these are reformists. However, the further down the list you go, the more revolutionary the changes. You go from amending the system from within the box to smashing the box and replacing it with a new system, is the general idea. So that's the idea of this scale. So let's go down the list, starting with number 1. So electoralism, charity drives, public awareness, education, propaganda campaigns, and boycott. These are all easy things that we can all do and things that we should be doing at this time. And we should be using this to sow the seeds to move to 2. Peaceful protests, demonstration, public assembly. We have a constitutional right to do everything between 1 to 2. So we may as well do it. You may as well take advantage of your constitutional right to engage in these activities. I'm primarily speaking from a first world standpoint, but you can do it in the second and third world as well. It's just in the first world, the first 3 to 4 on the list are really the only viable tactics that we can organize at this time. 5, 6, and 7, no. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't be doing that if you're in a first world country at this time. And again, here I am. I will never advocate that you do 5, 6, and 7 on this channel. But if you're in a third world country, again, not advocating that you do it. I'm just saying that those of revolutionary disposition could potentially find the latter options on this list to be a lot more, valid, because people are satisfied with things as are. People aren't as brainwashed, so they're going to be more sympathetic to that violence. So, in the first world, I'm mainly going to be talking from a first world position. So, civil disobedience, anti-fascist action. So, when I think of anti-fascist action in the first world, I'm referring to soft Antifa. This entails really just counter-protesting right-wingers, doxing right-wingers, doing things to discourage, deplatform, and remove right-wingers from below, from a cultural bottom-up position. So anti-fascist action. Breaking up right-wing protests, countering right-wing protests. This is definitely something that's worth everybody's time. So, I showed up in a protest back in 2019. You had like a half a dozen Klansmen that were in Dayton that were gathered and organized, and they were holding their protest. You had like hundreds of cops armed with rubber bullets and military fatigue, helicopters, snipers on the roofs, sniper towers, and they were all aiming at the peaceful protesters. It was a BLM protest, or a counter protest to the Klan. So the Klan, basically, they spent millions of dollars in state assets to protect half a dozen Klansmen from the angry mob of hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of counter protesters. That, my friends, is anti-fascist action. And it also goes to show cops and the Klan go hand in hand. Cops are looking out for their buddies. They got to protect the half a dozen Ku Klux Klan members who are at the other side. I'm not even kidding. They've got barbed fence. They've got like barbed fence. They've got like waves of cops. They've got like SWAT team patrols in the streets. They've got snipers on the tower. Like the cops are there and they're ready. And the protesters outnumbered the police by like a 5-1 margin. But again, it was a peaceful protest, but it was a glorious day. Fun times. Met a lot of good comrades at that protest. Met a lot of Mormons, talked to some Black Israelites. It was a good time. So really, number 4 on this list is what we should really be like pushing for more than anything else. In the first world, number 4 is our number 1 bargaining chip. Striking, general striking, and college striking. I believe that striking mixed with civil disobedience, mixed with peaceful protest, demonstration, and public assembly, if you did enough of what was on this list from 2 to 4, and it was mobilized and organized well enough to a degree, again, speaking from a first world context, you could move mountains, and potentially you could engage in something resembling a peaceful revolution. You could have the state deposed and removed, but again, this requires a level of organization, class consciousness, and parallel institutions of dual power, which do not exist at this time. There's a lot of work that we have to do to work up to this point, but from 2 to 4, this is where we should be right now. I think that's what our conditions ultimately call for, and it's ultimately the workers' number 1 bargaining chip, is everything from 1 to 4 in the first world. So from 5 to 7, 5 to 7 are effective within certain contexts. Like I said, within a second and third world country. Organized crime, the Bolsheviks robbed trains and robbed banks to pay their cadre a salary. They engaged in selective terroristic activity like assassinating government heads. and so on. Looting and rioting, generally looting and rioting are not organized, but they could be. Not saying you should, I'm just saying it's possible that they could be organized. They're basically a lower level of expropriations, which is right here. Expropriations, seizing government buildings, seizing the means of production, insurrection, overthrowing the government. That's basically it. So this is the total range of political action. Pick your advocacy according to your place in the world and what is most appropriate. If you're a burger like me, stick with 1 to 4 and focusing on building up to 1 to 4, and mainly 1 to 4. And let's finish by talking about hard Antifa. What do I mean by hard Antifa? What's the difference between soft anti-fascist action and hard anti-fascist action? Well, when I think of hard Antifa, I think of the Greek Antifa taking Molotov cocktails and throwing them at tanks and government buildings. I think of people breaking into the apartments and the living quarters of fascist politicians and fascist organizers and leading organizers, people breaking and entering, destroying everything in their apartments, burning the house down and leaving. I think of, high-ranking far-right politicians going missing and disappearing, getting 1984'd, so to speak. That's what I think of when I think of hard anti-fascist action. But again, I would never advocate that you guys do anything illegal on this channel. I'm just giving examples of what that would look like. Again, this whole list is here for purely educational purposes. Do not commit any crime. Crime bad. So, let's go ahead and finish with this conclusion. Oh, there is nothing here. Well, we'll leave it open anyways. So wrapping up, that's pretty much the degree that I have to say. That's really all I have to say for the most part. I hope this has been helpful or informative to anybody who's tuning in. I hope so. I'm probably going to include my slides in the Discord. It's up to you guys. But my point is that you can't reject the political struggle. People aren't going to magically wake up one day and decide to do the right thing. And it's up to us, the most educated and politically conscious out there, to go out and make a difference. So go out and make that difference wherever and whenever you can. I was hoping that a lot more people would come in to this stream, but it's okay, because I think what I'm going to do is chop it up, edit it, and re-upload it to my channel, doing a little stream clips, a little segmenting. I don't know if you guys have noticed that I've been doing that lately, but yeah, this is it. This is pretty much the extent of what you need to do. You've got to fight. There's really no way to go about it. You have to fight the system. You can't reject politics. You can't reject the class struggle. There are a number of core fundamental principles that we need to adhere to, no matter what. And I think that the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project, rejecting the class struggle, the political struggle, the rejection of Marxist theory and literature, the rejection of really the shared socialist history, as it's left them blindsided politically. It's left them irrelevant, like they're not getting anywhere. I mean, yeah, they've gained some popularity over the years, but they don't have answers. They don't have like a valid path, as far as I've read, from how to get from where we are now to where we want to be. They don't have steps. They don't have a step-by-step process to do that. Their theory is shit. They don't have a plan to action or a guide to action. It's, from what I can tell, it's just get together and hold meetings, do media and art projects. I apologize, but I really don't know what else to say besides that. So yeah, that's the summary of my advice. Check out those books on the list. Start reading theory. Start reading history. Stop falling for anti-communist propaganda. Actually consider, because Marxism and like the sustainability world outlook are actually highly compatible. Like Marxist theory is extremely compatible with the advocacy of the Venus Project and Zeitgeist movement. And for those of you who consider yourself advocates of it, all of this, like Marxist theory, leftist and communist literature, again, is extremely compatible with your beliefs and ideas, and you would benefit a colossal fuck ton by reading. Like, I encourage it. If you don't have the patience or attention span to read, you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I have a lot of Marxist theory and concepts that I'd like to start talking about in detail. There are also a lot of good, like, leftist channels out there, like Marxist Paul, Midwestern Marx, I think, is another good one. Hakeem, Yagopnik, Second Thought. There are a lot of theory channels, Tovarish and Damien, Finnish Bolshevik, Jason Unruh. I can think of a lot of YouTube channels you could go start watching their videos, and eventually you'll start developing a much better political scientific mind. Of course, look at all open-minded. You're free to be skeptical. Definitely be skeptical. I mean, you're free to disagree. And you don't even have to identify as Marxist if you don't want to. I'm just saying that you would benefit a great deal from reading this long shared history, because there have been a lot of thinkers that share a common goal with you that wrote a great deal about how to get to that common goal. And there's a formula and there's a method that has been established by the Marxist movement that has been successful in the establishment of a camp of socialist countries lasting and spanning decades. Like, guys, check this out. I mean, and you can argue all you want that they failed. Be like, but they failed. They're not here anymore. Okay, they still made it way fucking further than your ideology has so far. Look at this shit, dude. This is where communism and socialism has spread. Like, this is the communist world in 1978. And if it wasn't for the US and CIA fuckery, you would see a lot more red on this list. Like, pretty much the whole continent of Latin America would be red right now if it wasn't for the United States by 1978. So yeah, right now there are still 5 countries led by communist governments left: China, North Korea, Laos, Cuba, Vietnam. Of these 5 countries, the only ones I would really consider socialist by any extent would be Cuba and the DPRK. But otherwise, like, even Cuba is slowly starting to liberalize. But yeah, anyways, that's a lot better progress. Marxism, that's a much, much better than any other leftist movement or group has achieved or been able to accomplish. And let me show you one more thing. I want to show you guys one more thing before I'm done here. And that is, oh man, I totally forgot what it was. Oh, I remember. Let me open up my Discord real quick. Where is Veritas? Here we go. Also, even in the countries where communism didn't happen, you have the communists to thank for this. These are the average work hours, average work week, work hours. Why do you think workers were able to win so many concessions? One of the reasons why this is when you have a block of communist countries led by a communist superpower, they're able to provide this quality of life. So the capitalist countries are like, oh, fuck, we got to give into some concessions or the workers will revolt. So in the first world, they were basically forced to give in to a shit ton of concessions and basically bribe their own populations into not rebelling. You want to know why there hasn't been revolution in the first world? It's because the ruling class has successfully bribed their own populations into not rebelling with the spoils of imperialist plunder. But look at this. By 1920, 1917, 1918, look at this. You see a colossal drop. Like right there's the October Revolution. Right there's the end of the Russian Civil War. And then, ooh, World War II. Ooh, I don't think that's a coincidence, guys. I don't think this is a coincidence at all. Like October Revolution, it crashes. So make of that as you will. Let's do this. Let's wrap up. But first, We're going to do a Q&A segment for the next 15 minutes. I think we will. I'm going to go through and read some comments. Let's read some comments. What is my favorite quote in the Communist Manifesto? I don't really have a favorite quote, to be honest. I don't really think the manifesto is a very great. I mean, it's a call to action, but I don't really think it's necessary. I got nothing for you, ma'am. I like to imagine the communist future where there'd be a statue of Cockshot. Yeah. I think there's a lot of statues and portraits that are owed to a lot of people who've all made their contributions. People really need to start thinking within the context of class when they think about democracy and dictatorship. Democracy for who? Dictatorship for who? Who has the say? Who doesn't? Who's allowed to have the say? Who doesn't? Yeah, I think democracy is a good thing. I absolutely do. Which is why I don't think people of the ruling class psychology should have any say in the way the means of production run and function. And at the same time, the only way we can have true democracy is if it's socialist. So, in a sense, Soviet Union was more democratic than the United States ever was. Which one? Like, which video are you talking about? But anyways. Well, it doesn't look like you guys got a lot of questions for me, so I think I'm done. I think I'm going to close, but share the stream. I mean, no point now, but tell you what, you guys want to go for another hour? I'm going to start another stream. How's that sound? Let's do it. I need a poll. We're taking a vote. You guys want to do another stream? Type da or het if for yes or no. So copy pasta. So if you'd like me to keep streaming, type da or het. This for yes and this for no. Let's take a little vote. I'll give you guys a minute to decide. But regardless, I'm going to be stream for a little while longer. If I can get, I don't know, let's say at least 7 or 8 people saying yes. It's up to you guys. Poll closes in the next, I don't know, 5 minutes. We'll call it 5 minutes. There we go. So we got, looks like people want me to keep going. Nice. That's 2. I know a little Russian. Not very much, but I know enough to say yes, no, hello, goodbye, introduce myself. I can't count, actually. That's a lie. I can't count. I'm trying to learn Russian. I want to learn Russian, Spanish, Chinese, Hindi, and I think that's about it. Because if you learn those 4 languages, you can pretty much talk to like 2/3 of the planet's population, maybe more. Well, seeing as that we got 2 people that want me to keep going, nah, I don't know. Tell you what, guys, let me take a little break, and I'll probably start up another stream here in like the next half hour to an hour. Let's play it by ear, but for now, I want to take a little break before we go for another hour. But anywho, I'll publish the stream soon, and we'll stay in touch. So what will I call it? So someone, let's see. Oh, infrared stand-up comedy. We'll do infrared stand-up comedy. Sure, that works. We'll schedule it for later. We'll schedule it for 3 p.m. That sound good? Let's schedule it for 3 p.m. All right, guys. We have the new stream. We have it up. Somebody mentioned infrared stand-up comedy act at the Center for Political Innovation. Someone's gonna have to give me the hookup on that. Here, let me hook you guys up. But anywho, I'll see you guys over there. Hit me up in the DMs. But yeah, salutes.